I came across this video. I came across this article on Quillette this week, and I wanted to share it with you. I think it's really great and give some of my thoughts. The preachers of the Great Awokening, and I think the Great Awokening is a great way to describe what is happening on the left these days. From the sun-balanced beaches of California to the snow-covered cities of New England, a religious fervor is sweeping the United States. PhD-toting preachers spreading the faith with religious zeal, denouncing those who have violated its sacred principles. Sinners are threatened not by an angry God, but by a righteous mob. The impediments among them are condemned to be outcast. While the contrite, they properly mortify themselves and pledge everlasting fealty to the faith, can secure enough lost status to rejoin society, perhaps, for marked by a scarlet epitaph, racism, sexism, ableism. This is the religion of the awakening. This is the religion of wokeness, and this is the era of the Great Awokening. And it is fundamentally a religious action. Many people on the left, many people on the right, many people in general today talk about how they are not religious. You cannot be not religious. Religion is an algorithm, is your algorithm how to live. You can deny the preset religions, just like you can choose not to run a computer with with one of the big operating systems, Microsoft OS, Windows or Linux. You can try and build your operating system from scratch, but if you do so, you're going to have a lot of ugly problems, a lot of solved problems come up and arise. And this is what we're seeing with the religion of wokeness, the religion of the Great Awakening. Is we're seeing the left plagued by many of the problems of how to live that are solved by more sophisticated and matured religions. So we have a little clip here. Make sense of tech awakening. Former executive of Google, Facebook, and Apple now decrying the negative effects of their products that helpfully build. What's motivating? What can they do to atone? In the following article, we'll explain this quasi-religion, wokeness, as a status system that functions predominantly to disguise white elites, functions predominantly to distinguish white elites from the white masses, whom we will call the hoi polloi. This is another excellent point, and this is really of any sort of social game or religion. Social structure is going to have that social hierarchy. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about hierarchies, and this is in any religion is going to have that component of a hierarchy that you're going to be able to climb, just like you have it. You talk about being on a career track at work. So if you start playing one of these games, you jump onto the hierarchy and will be have these social pursuits. And a big part of this wokeness is to separate or justify the privilege of actual elites. And it's focusing on white elites, but it's not just like it's justifying the privilege of the elites against the hoi polloi. And the hoi polloi they're talking about here is especially the white who are the whites, simply because they fall into this sort of moral space, this moral donut, where where people, these elites are trying to be so moral and have such a big circle of who's in their moral circle that they actually have some holes that are created, and one of these holes is what the hoi polloi, as they're called here, fall into. It does offer this by offering a rich signaling vocabulary for traits and possessions such as education, intelligence, openness, leisure, wealth, and cosmopolitanism, all of which educated elites value. For similar analysis, see Rihan Salam's August essay in The Atlantic, discussed by David French in the National Review, article linked above. From this perspective, the preachers of the Great Awakening, those who most ardently and eloquently articulate the principles of wokeness, obtain status because they A, signal the possession of the desired traits, and B, promulgate a powerful narrative that legitimizes the status disparities between white elites and the hoi polloi. The elites, accordingly to these preachers, are morally righteous and therefore deserve status, where the hoi polloi are morally backward and deserve, oh my gosh, what's this word? Obloquy and derision. This is, it's about, it's about creating a separation of the in group and the out group, and the woke and the not woke. And it's strange because these people are, the cosmopolitanism, the inclusion, the diversity, there is central tenets when the whole behavior, the operation is tribalistic. It's to create and justify an in-group and an out-group. And this is exactly right. It's important not to note before we begin that this perspective does not contend that all actors in this status system are cynical charlatans. In fact, it insists that many legitimately believe their assertions about pervasive racism, sexism, transphobia, etc., and feel compelled to preach their doctrines so as to make a society more just. And this is this is how all religions work, right? This is a game that's offered to them to play. Like, they actually do feel like this world is unfair, and there's a lot of suffering out there, and there's rewards out there, and they don't seem to be fairly distributed with different perspectives. And this is exactly, if you read Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning, this is exactly how his book starts off. This is the problem. One of the problems if you try to step away from one of the sophisticated religions, is you have to face, like, well, how can I? It's the problem of evil, the problem of suffering. How do I account for the suffering in the world? How would I account for the evil in the world? And the awokeness gives the religion of the woke provides that service for you. It has that. It gives you something to do to start solving the inequities and suffering in the world. It's how do you live? That's the fundamental role of a religion. Sincere belief in status motives often conspire. For example, the famous preachers of the Great Awokening, from whom we derive our title, almost certainly believe the urgency of their message and the elaborate metaphysics of their faith, but also obtain status from their books and sermons. And again, this is it's exactly it. If you can't run away from religion, if you try and abandon one of the existing sophisticated religions, you're just going to make a primitive religion up on your own. And this is what we are seeing in the 21st century. Before analyzing wokeness as a status system, we must understand it as a quasi-religious doctrine. It's not quasi at all. It is a religious doctrine. Unlike scientific theories or other empirical claims, the basic tenets of wokeness are held with sacred fervor. Those who challenge them are not debated. Rather, their motives are denounced, and they are cast out of polite society like heretics, because they are heretics. To take just one example, when someone objects to the woke principle, that diversity is a strength, committed believers rarely greet the objection as an opportunity for argument. Instead, they attack the apostate for his sacrilege and accuse him of unspeakable moral treachery. See the table below for examples. And again, this is why more sophisticated religions can be tolerant, because they're actually they've actually played these games and evolved past them. So when you actually set up a new, less sophisticated religion about that, you fall into these traps, and then there is no doctrine to actually, no catches in the algorithm, no doctrine available to get you out of these thought traps, these bubbles, and these reinforcement traps that will actually sort of doom your religion in the wrong time, because it's creating a smaller, and this kind of pattern will create a smaller and smaller in-group in the long run. But here we go. So a table. The chief dogmas of awokeness are that all demographic groups are roughly biologically the same. which we have termed cosmic egalitarianism elsewhere. That's a pretty good term for it. Bigotry is pervasive. Yeah, almost all disparities among demographic groups are caused by bigotry. If we all work really hard, we can create a more just multicultural society. Diversity is almost always a good thing. These are actually quite interesting, and it like there's a underpinning of the existential sufferings that are innate to human being that these are addressing. One of it is the idea of despair, which is, I'd call the third suffering, is almost all disparities among demographic groups are caused by bigotry. That is, it's a statement. It is actually counter to reality. But the importance, the service that it provides to the believer is, it says, yes, you can reach this utopian future. This is that. Yes, there's suffering in the world, but you can eliminate all suffering from the world. You can reach this heaven on earth, this nirvana, a utopia state, where there will be no more suffering. And that, so, it's a call to action, which is, one of the big calls, like it's the motivation of religion, but it is problematic, or you wouldn't see such calls in more sophisticated religions, because it is reality denying to a very high degree. These dogmas have far-reaching consequences. For example, Dogma 2 compels woke believers to view almost every human action as tainted and possibly determined by some kind of racial or sexual bias. While Serena Williams, for example, severely scolded an umpire and was docked a game, woke pundits and preachers rose as one to announce that her punishment proved that sexism and racism still plague tennis, that her punishment might be the impartial response of the tennis empire was hardly considered, and those who did consider it were met with derision and invective. Yeah, great vocabulary on this article, and exactly right. It's there's other problems of having these mono solution or mono cause ideologies. So if you say that everything is caused by bigotry, well, things can't be caused by anything else. So the facts of the situation have to be ignored or selectively called. And well, any value system is going to do that, as Jordan Peterson points out. But in this case, you're only going to see or explain things with the sexism and racism, because those are the primary tools of how the whole world works under your woke religion. So the woke pieties, all groups are basically the same. As an example moralization: if you study sex differences, then you are sexist. Racism, sexism, and other bigotries are ubiquitous. If you deny the prevalence of bigotry, then you are a bigot. Disparities in outcome among groups are almost always caused by bigotry. If you search for another cause of social disparities, then you are part of the problem. Race, diversity of race, sex, sexuality, always and everywhere are a good thing. If you think diversity can be bad, it's because you're a bigot. So this is a great list, and these are actually highlighting some very big problems with the religion of wokeness, and why it's unsophisticated. And one of the reasons I'm saying, using this term unsophisticated, where sophisticated religions that have lasted thousands of years, they go through these iterations, these crucibles, where they actually have to, they cause social problems, and then the religion has to be modified if it is to survive. It has to come up with the solutions to these social problems. The religion has to fix itself. It has to put in algorithms that are going to fix these, so it doesn't cause the same problems again. And maybe social justice wokeness will carry on in the future, but it's causing huge social problems, and it's a kind of religion like this could not exist in a more primitive society, or even in many societies. Like you can't have wokeness in China or Russia in the same way you have it now in the tolerant West. It's only in a Western democracy where a religion like this can can exist and exist long term. And this is it's disruptive to the host of like the Western democracy model. So it's only because of our luxury that we can afford to have such an aberrant religion exists, where it would actually have, and it won't exist. Either wokeness will change when our society starts to collapse and degrade, becomes more authoritarian because of wokeness, or something else will have to give, because this is not these kind of flaws will destroy and disrupt the civilization, the host civilization, and this is not a recipe for long-term success. More broadly, woke dogmas lead to sacred narratives about the nobility of perceived victim groups like blacks, women, Muslims, gays, transsexuals, etc. Members of these groups are to be considered the innocent victims of oppressive and iniquitous patriarchy. Whites, on the other hand, are burdened with the original sin of privilege and therefore presumptively complicit in the system unless they declare fealty to wokeness. This creates a Manchurian moral doctrine that purports to reverse the current power hierarchies. Victims groups are revered and the powerful are despised. No one is probably going to watch it. Like this article, I love the vocabulary level in this, but I'm realizing like how many people are going to be stumbling over these words, as I am, and I'm sure many other people are going to do. We have a dictionary handy, my friends. This is very well written and sophisticated stuff, and it has high religious linguistic precision as well. However, we are willing to argue that this hierarchy is not so simple, because it actually elevates a healthy proportion of the powerful, namely the white educated elites who profess unquestioning devotion to wokeness. So in the end, it is not really a status reversal so much as a way of distinguishing one group of whites from the rest. Yeah, and that's exactly it. It really is a justification of the status quo more than it is a call to action to any other society. And this is the thing, right? Because the believers will believe, because they have this utopian target of a world without discrimination and therefore without suffering, right? So if only we don't discriminate, if we destroy these, make everyone treated the same, and this is the communist utopia then sort of bundled up here. So we destroy the oppressive and iniquitous patriarchy, then we have a wonderful society. But they're not really trying to do that, because like the largest proponents, if they ever topple their patriarchy, won't do that. And maybe lots of religions you can argue are never going to reach. They have an unattainable end game. But this is interesting because there's ultimately the results of their actions are not in no way going to be pursuant to what they're actually setting out to achieve. And they really, there's a high level of deception within this, within the religion of wokeness too. Wokeness as a status system, because it allows a person priority access to crucial and coveted resources such as money and mates. The desire for status is probably a fundamental human motivation. So we're going to explain why status is so important. And yeah, and it is. And because you got to climb that social hierarchy, become top lobster. That's the top lobster. And because that desire is primitive and powerful, many social practices and activities function at least partially to delineate the status relationships. They can be analyzed as status systems and operate in predictable ways, because whenever its diverse manifestations, society status has come in variant features. Most importantly is the inexpansible. That is to say, it's the supply does not grow. Unlike the economic pie, the status pie remains roughly the same size across time. Yeah, this is actually an excellent point. The that there is only there's like status has sort of like this sort of I guess sort of zero sum. Is it zero sum or like, well, a fixed component, right? You can't create any more status because your status is if you gain status, it's a hierarchy. So other people go lower in status, right? Think of it like a class ranking at school. It's another similar status hierarchy. That's quantitative. If you are the best kid in the class, then someone else can't be the best kid in the class. Yeah, if you have the highest grades, if you have the second highest grades, then there's going to be, and then you have the highest grades. The other person's going to be number 2. That is to say, supply does not grow. If one person's status goes up, another must go down, which explains why people are exquisitely sensitive, not only to the gains in their own status, but also to the gains in other people's status. Another's triumph invariably rearranges the distribution of a finite and precious resource. And we have a hypersensitivity to these kinds of games because status is so important with the in-group dynamics. Like it's a huge part of why our brain developed the way that it is. And this is why you'll see calls to things like, hiding salaries or hiding salaries or other or grades, or where we'll see calls to like not show posters of women who are pretty because it makes other women feel less than, because it's going to be engaging those systems of internal calculation. Among other things, wokeness appears to operate as just such a status system. This does not mean that its only function is to adjudicate status competitions, but it does mean that one of its crucial functions is to do so, as any religion will have a status component to it. And it does this primarily by offering a signaling vocabulary which can distinguish educated elites in the hoi polloi. And it's not just religions, it's more even like video games, anything that's multiplayer. You're going to have a status system, maybe not actually physically representing the game, but as soon as you have players interacting, I'm going to know who's better than who I am. I'm going to be playing that social game because it's fundamentally such a big part of the human psyche. The elites who thus benefit offer status to those who defend and legitimize the woke narrative, the preachers, as they strip status from those who dissent. This perspective illuminates many otherwise inexplicable aspects of woke culture, such as why do woke norms change quickly, and why are they so complicated, thus alienate so many potential allies. Yeah, well, it's again because it's a religion. Well, as I said, unsophisticated religion. It's a religion that hasn't reached a good equilibrium of in-group, out-group balance, right? So you're going to have this problem where it's actually self-killing. The attacking your own problem hasn't been well solved. Why do woke preachers often denigrate those who fail woke purity tests, thus alienating potential allies? Why do people in woke culture expend so much effort sending signals to each other and so little quietly working to improve people's lives? Why don't more woke preachers strive to make as many friends and partners among the hoi polloi as possible, since the partnership would help them to achieve their stated goals? Because their stated goals aren't realistic, and they're not really out to achieve them as so much to state what they're, it's a game. It's based a lot on signaling and sending out the right signals. To begin with, we'll examine the nature of the woke, and he jumps right into it. Woke signaling vocabulary. Signals that are effective must be reliably connected to what they signal. Sometimes such as reliability is achieved because the communicator and receiver share interests. If Mary tells her teammates that she's going to cut left and then next play, and then her teammate has little reason to doubt the signal, i.e. the sentence because they share interests, namely they both want to win the game. But often, reasonably reliability can only be achieved by using costly signals, signaling the honest communicators can afford, but the dishonest communicators cannot. So yeah, I actually hadn't heard this theory presented this way before reading this article, and I think it's actually, quite an interesting point that creating a cost barrier can be a way of keeping on honest communication, or helping to limit dishonest communicators. It is trivially easy, not costly, to assert that one is educated and sophisticated or committed to a doctrine. Therefore, very few people pay attention to pronouncements, except that they might indicate narcissism. On the other hand, it is not easy, it is costly to speak a jargon that is taught only at universities that may require hours of dedication to master. Therefore, people pay attention and often to defer to those who command a rich, complicated jargon. And you'll see this, in web development or any IT field as well. You're going to see that there's a jargon that has to be studied. Doctors have their jargons, lawyers have their jargons, and it is a way of detecting if one's group membership and how deep into the group one is. Wokeness provides this kind of sophisticated argot for signalers. Those who preach its gospel often use bizarre concepts imported from postmodernist theories, infamous for their impenetrable prose. Terms such hegemonic, intersectional, phallocentric, and queerphobe are regularly deployed, intimidating the uninitiated and impressing those who wish in the future to signal their erudition to fawning fans. Even woke language for popular consumption is complicated by quick changing list of taboo epithets. It is wrong to say that is it wrong to say that say homosexual relationship? Is it all right to say African American? Will I be berated if I say Mexican American? These changing prohibitions function well to distinguish elites from hoi polloi because they require devotion, erudition, and the right social acquaintances to understand. And you'll see this in any sort of in-group, out-group, again, formulating thing, like the jargon, the language is a good way to develop that. And it shows, again, that this setting up of this minefield, PC minefield, outside for the hoi polloi is another interesting aspect, because it's a way to only mark but also denigrate the hoi polloi, because they'll flag them, oh, you use that word. And so you got to keep up. And it creates an incentive to continually be part of the group, because if you fall out, you may fall out of the ever-changing language and denigration. And if you actually look at, people talk about the postmodernist theories, but postmodernist texts being obscurist and using language, but the language is designed to create that. It's, people they've pointed out that it has been a response to the scientific jargon, especially in physics and that. But physics uses language with precision, and a lot of you'll notice that a lot of the postmodernist terms are intentionally vague and broad meaning. So the definitions are frequently changed. It's often like a word, and it's the goal is completely the goal is obscurism for exactly this jargonistic purpose, this tribal purpose. Using arcane language and adhering to the constantly changing norms about acceptable epithets are not particularly effective for attracting people from a broader population to one's cause. And that's not the point of wokeness. In fact, they're almost certainly alienate many average and otherwise sympathetic Americans who understandably disdain indecipherable prose and elite superciliousness. Ooh, that's a great one. Therefore, the signaling function of the woke faith is actually antithetical to the stated goals of wokeness, i.e. creating a more just social world, which requires a broad coalition of different classes of people. Yeah, funny how they don't talk about class too much. Also antithetical to the stated goals of wokeness is the tendency of its most popular preachers to castigate sinners instead of calmly attempting to persuade them of the justness of the woke doctrine. Antithetical, but perfectly comprehensible from a signaling perspective. Those who are woke don't really want to inhabit an entirely woke world without the bigoted masses. Instead, they want to occupy a world of good and evil, of the just and the wicked, of the high status and the low status, of the elite and the hoi polloi. I want to actually sort of point out here that there was an excellent Dr. Seuss book called The Sneetches that you should read on this. It's a children's book, of course, by Dr. Seuss, where there's Sneetches with stars on their bellies and Sneetches without stars on their bellies, and it's exactly sort of pointing to this sort of idea of human nature. And it's very interesting in this religion of wokeness that they're talking about full inclusivity, but really it's always to be achieved by cutting people out. The woke faithful almost certainly do believe that the world is unjust, even wicked, and they most certainly do sincerely want to mutilate the suffering of its victims. It's interesting. I don't know if that's entirely true. I'd have to think about that more. However, they also want to signal their membership to an elite and morally righteous club, and therefore they need an outgroup, a foil, a morally wicked other for contrast. And they can't just let any kind-hearted person into their club because it would lose its exclusivity. So they must develop a strenuous vetting system, one that is vigilant and suspicious and quick to detect sin. Furthermore, accusing others of violating the faith of wokeness can serve as a signal of one's commitment to the righteousness, and perhaps pervasively, the more ridiculous the accusation, the better the signal. How, after all, can someone who accuses the entire tennis world of racism and sexism be racist or sexist? This is what can led to a kind of concept creep in which those vying for status among the woke compete to call out vanishingly trivial offenses and imagine slights as intolerable manifestations of racism, sexism, and patriarchal oppression. Meanwhile, many other sane people with no interest in this excess of the Great Awokening nevertheless feel compelled to agree with such fantastical claims for fear that otherwise they too will be accused of bigotry. And I think part of this too is sort of like an over-sensification of society, that we're a victim of our own success. And why it's another reason again why this religion of wokeness wouldn't be able to exist in anywhere but the abundance of as a stable Western democracy, Western democratic capitalist system. If you have a system where all your basic needs are met, if in any sort of actual real suffering or bigotry would make this whole thing farcical. So it is religion. So the religion of the wokeness is actually like really a big part of the religion of people who are just. It's a religion for hyper privileged people who have not reached a level of suffering in their life that many people have typically had to put up with or typically expect from their environment throughout history. They may also explain the utility of outlandish beliefs. Anybody can believe something that is true. It takes no effort, no talent, no real commitment, but to believe something that is transparently ridiculous, such as the men and women are biologically the same, and to assert such a belief with force and conviction requires singular devotion to a coalition and to its sacred narrative. Therefore, those compelling for status in the world of wokeness may strenuously profess a belief in risible propositions, i.e. the demographic groups are the same, to signal commitment to the cause. Further, attempts correctiveness, such as offering heaps of contradictory data, may all be counterproductive, simply serving to highlight the dedication of the besieged believer. Of course, the signaling perspective also explains why so many disciples of wokeness expelled effort, writing inscrutable articles about the patriarchy or denouncing sinners on Twitter rather than going out into the world to help their victim groups they claim to admire. The primary motivation when the conscious beliefs is to procure status. There are, of course, many courageous and devoted people who do work quietly to make the world a better place for minority groups, and these people deserve our admiration. But many of the most conspicuous activists spending time promising punishment to heretics on Twitter than they do helping their local communities. These Twitter displays are often called virtue signals, but they are probably better understood as commitment signals, because they don't really signal a person's underlying moral character, but they do signal her allegiance to the faith of wokeness. I think this is a distinction without a difference, because it is a religion, and you are accepting a moral, like a value hierarchy, a system of morality that comes with that religion. So you are signaling your virtue under the lens and in the game of wokeness. You are positioned on the hierarchy, and that's exactly so. Yeah, so it is a commitment signal. Is absolutely true, but that is no different than how is that different than a virtue signal? Because a virtue is just one's virtue is determined by one's commitment to that virtue. So it's the exact thing, or someone's alignment or commitment to that virtue. So it's exactly the same thing. And I think there's more to this article, Preachers of the Great Awakening. But for a first shot, I think that I have spent enough time on this. And you can go and read the article yourself if you find it interesting, and keep on going.